Welcome to Leaders of Today. I'm your host, Lorraine Connell, and today's guest is a powerhouse of resilience, transformation, and truth. I'm joined by Kim Russell, a hairstylist, writer, speaker, and trauma-informed mentor with over 40 years in the beauty industry and 3 decades as a successful salon owner. Kim is also the host of the Survivor Chair podcast, where she holds space for real conversations around healing and growth. A breast cancer survivor, former foster youth, and adoptee, Kim's journey has been anything but easy. But these very experiences have fueled her passion for helping others. Her work centers around healing, self-trust, and rewriting the subconscious stories that hold us back. In today's conversation, Kim opens up about surviving her teen years, shaped by hyper-independence, feelings of invisibility, and a deep-seated worthlessness. How those struggles now allow her to connect deeply with others facing trauma in both life and business. This episode is raw, real, and filled with powerful insights into how our past shapes our path and how we choose to reclaim it. So let's dive right in. You're listening to today's leaders, from teens to titans. Hi, I'm Lorraine Connell, a teen leadership coach. I transitioned from teaching chemistry to coaching teens in leadership, helping them realize they can do hard things. We've often believed that leadership is an innate trait, but it's actually a skill that you build and improve. On this show, you'll meet today's leaders who share their teenage experiences, revealing how they developed confidence, direction, and the tools to become the leaders they are now. You'll discover how you or the teens in your life have the potential to become confident leaders, even if it doesn't seem possible. Welcome, Kim. I'm so grateful to have you today.
Thank you for having me. And that was a spectacular bio. Thank you.
Oh, yes. So let's start by going back in time. Tell me a little bit about your teenage years and how your experience as a teen shaped you into the person you are and the work you find yourself doing today.
Where to start? Well, my teenage years were filled with drug use, alcohol, people pleasing, class clown, anything that would give me some kind of positive attention or negative attention. It really didn't matter. If I was getting some kind of attention, that made me feel good. And how did that shape me today? I guess I feel like I can meet people where they're at, and I don't have any judgment on where people are at.
So interesting that you talk about, it's almost like attention seeking and attention, like no matter what it was. And I often find that there are a lot of teens, a lot of kids who exhibit behavior as bad behavior in order to be seen, in order to be heard, in order to be almost validated that they exist. And so does that resonate with you?
It does resonate with me. And I think part of my journey being in foster care and being adopted is you do feel invisible, unwanted. Nobody really notices you. You're just kind of an object that's getting tossed from thing to thing.
Can you share a little bit about being in the foster program? I don't have a lot of experience in that area. And I know that, anybody listening, getting a sense of what it's like from the kid's perspective might be really valuable.
Yes, I can definitely share that. And my story's a little bit different because I didn't bounce from home to home. I was abandoned in a car when I was 1, and then I was placed into emergency foster care placement with my foster parents who became my adoptive parents. But I was with them for 4 years in foster care. And, growing up, I always said to myself, well, my story is not that bad because I didn't have to go from house to house. But as a child, it was just as complicated because there was no security. There was always this fear of having to leave where you are. You had confusion around who mom and dad were and, who was Jen and Fred, who were my foster parents, who were very excited to be mom and dad, yet you knew you had a different mom and dad. It was just very confusing. But the fear, I lived with fear my whole entire life, and it started in the backseat of that car and traveled throughout my life.
So, Kim, I think one of the questions that I wonder is how can we know that as young as one or as young as you were, how can that live as a fear when we perceive kids of that age as being not of mind and body and just sort of an existence at that point?
Well, they are of mind and body. That's the important thing to know. And I talk about trauma chips, and I talk about how I had these little trauma chips in my body. I don't have a visual memory of being in the backseat of that car, but I have an emotional memory that lives inside of my body that I can explain to a T what it was like to sit in the backseat, not knowing when somebody was coming back, looking out the window, waiting, watching, knowing it had been a long time, sobbing, crying. That is an emotional memory that lives inside of my body.
Okay. I was just in a conversation with somebody recently about mental health stigma. I feel like my bias or my not understanding and knowing comes from the stigma that's often placed in the place of like, you were so young. How could that matter? Right. And so that stigma, that bias is coming out. And so I, as a teacher, get Kim as a 16, 17-year-old, and I only know Kim as being an adopted. Maybe I don't even know that Kim has been adopted. And so how do I, or how can you, Kim, now as an adult, share with the adults in teenage Kim's world, like, how could we have gotten more information? How could we have been more supportive? How could we have known information to help us better serve the Kim that showed up in our classroom?
I think the behavior always speaks for itself. I've always said that kids who have bad behavior, that's a way of them trying to express what's going on in their body. They don't have words for it, they don't understand it, but they're trying to express it. So they express it out of actions, out of doing, whether it's, for me, it was drugs and it was making people laugh. That was my expression. So a lot of kids that have that anger, that all I can say is bad behavior, that's them just trying to express what they have inside their body about what their childhood is like or was like.
And what do you think you were expressing to your classmates, your educator?
Oh, I was, please like me. Please don't discard me. Please don't forget about me. Please help me.
Wow. And I, as being a teacher, feel like that is so far from the message that I'm receiving from that behavior. And what a miss, right? Like two parallel lines going off into space forever and never intersecting. So, wow.
That's why I think trauma-informed education for teachers is so important. Even just to have just a little bit of knowledge to understand trauma, how it works, how it manifests, how it shows up in these kids. I mean, I'm sure, as a teacher, maybe you didn't have kids in your class that were in the foster care system. They were in a home that they didn't know or that was new to them. They new friends, new schools, so teachers being able to understand what that child is going through would be huge. So helpful.
At what point did you get the message that behaving in that way would get you that thing that you were desiring? And I guess maybe you don't have an answer to this, but like, how do you think that translated in information that allowed you or continued to perpetuate that belief that if I acted this way, I might get the attention I'm seeking?
I have the exact story for you. When I was 5, that's when I was adopted. And I remember sitting in the judge's chambers, and his question to me, before I say that, it was very scary. All these people were there. And I didn't understand it. It was, as they say, they almost use the same language as dogs, gotcha day. And sitting in the judge's chambers, and I just didn't understand what was happening. And he said to me, "Do you want to live with Jan and Fred forever?" And in that moment, at 5 years old, I had panic because what if I said the wrong thing? What would happen? What if I said yes and they didn't want me? Where would I go? What would I eat? Where would I sleep? If I said no, same thing. What would happen? Where would I go? Where would I sleep? What would I eat? When you're a child in that scenario, those moments, you only think about survival. You don't think about anything else because that's all your life is focused on. So when I whispered a very quiet yes, the entire room cheered and clapped and was happy. And it was in that moment that I said, okay, if I just do what people want, if I just say what people want to hear, then I'll be safe. I won't be discarded. I won't be left alone. And at that moment, that's where people pleasing, stuffing my own needs and wants down, being silent, all of that came into play.
Wow. Well, it's so interesting. My first thought when I heard you say what the judge asked, like on the outside looking in, not being that 5-year-old, not being that, survivor, and thinking, this is the easiest question,
And
right? So I, as the judge, I, as the adult asking you this question, have no idea what an enormous amount of pressure that puts on a child.
And the excitement that everybody had, I didn't have that excitement. I didn't understand it. I didn't even understand what was happening. I didn't know what it meant. And everybody was so excited. And I was like, okay.
Did it almost scare you, startle you?
After I said that yes, it was just zip it and sit there and be quiet.
Do you want to live with them forever? Wow.
What does forever even mean? I didn't know.
And as a 5-year-old, that's so scary.
So scary. And up until that point, being, with them as foster parents, my foster mother was very nervous. And she said daily, multiple times a day, they can come at any time and just snatch you up.
Oof.
So I feared that I was going to be snatched. And technically, as an adult, because I wasn't adopted yet, they could. My biological parents' parental rights were not taken away at that point, and that was the holdup. So they could come and say, okay, she's going to go live with so-and-so now. But, I didn't understand that. I heard snatched. I was going to be snatched. I had to watch my back. I had to, be careful. There was so much fear as a young child. It is not normal.
No, not at all. So what does it mean to be trauma informed? I hear a lot of people saying that they're trauma informed. I know teachers say I'm trauma informed. What does it actually mean? And what is the requirement to say that you're trauma informed?
Well, there's no real requirement, but I have spent the last 4 years getting certifications. I'm certified in traumatic research studies from the Trauma Foundation in Boston. And so far I have 21 certificates through them, which is childhood trauma, attachment theories, internal family systems, every form of treatment that you can possibly imagine in every scenario, sexual behaviors for children who have been in abusive environments. So I think it's educating yourself on that. It's healing yourself. That is a piece that's missing. Having the lived experience, I think definitely helps. Then focusing on the healing and focusing on the education and knowing more about the science, about how the brain works, what happens when you get traumatized. It's different for a child that's under 5 years old than it is for a child that's over 5 years old. It's different for a child that's 16, 18, because the brain develops differently at times in your life. It's different. People don't understand what PTSD is compared to complex trauma, and it's different. PTSD is one thing. It's a car accident. That's it. That's what PTSD means. Complex is ongoing trauma. And that's what you see with kids who have been in the system. It's ongoing. And they are just building these walls, trying to put these safety things in place for themselves to survive. So trauma informed, it's a very wide word, I would say.
So, what do you think the minimum requirement or awareness for somebody to be trauma informed could be? What would you say to me if you were like, Lorraine, I know you're working with young adults. I would suggest this is what you should do to, at a minimum, have some experience with trauma.
I think this right here is good. You know, this talking to somebody who has a lived experience and has done the healing, you know, you can tell the difference when you've talked to people who hasn't done the work on themselves. And I get it because it's very hard and you have to go very deep and it's painful and it's all of the things. So I think this is a good place to start.
Mm.
And then getting a more educated experience probably under your belt, you know, a certificate of some sort, just so you can understand more. I don't think certificates necessarily make people smarter than other people.
Right.
You know, it just helps you with the understanding of what happens with trauma.
Yeah, and I think, the intent behind getting a certificate, if it's just to get a certificate, then you're not getting the education for the right reason. But if I want to know more and I get a certificate, then I can validate that I learned more. So I think it's like almost like, what is the reason for your certificate? And it really resonates with me of just learning more to better serve the population in which I am working. I want to go back to the thing that you said very early on about your experience as not being as bad as others. I think so often, I think of children and I know adults, but so often children are comparing and comparisonitis and, social media, like what's bad enough, what's not bad enough. And I also think of this woman that I discussed. I had an interview very early on where she said she applied for a scholarship and she didn't win. And she basically shared with me, so my story wasn't bad enough to win the award of the worst story. And that's really stuck with me a lot. So not only were you comparing your story to others just in general, but then we have this opportunity for you to maybe earn an award for your bad experience. And when you don't win, it's almost like, wow. I mean, I just think of the impact that that message has on an already traumatic experience.
I mean, in my position, I wouldn't even have applied for the scholarship because I wouldn't have felt good enough or worthy of it.
Right.
But one thing that happens in the adoptive world, and you can pretty much talk to anybody who's gone through it, is that it is embedded in our brain that we are to be grateful. And I was told multiple times in my life that you should be grateful you have a roof over your head and you have food because you could have ended up in the gutter somewhere multiple times. So whatever morsel I got, a little crumb, even if it was to go back to the bad behavior, if it was abusive behavior, negative feedback, and it just, that crumb was enough because I had to just be grateful for that crumb. So I would have never have gone for the scholarship, ever. I wouldn't even have had it in my sights.
So where does the message come about being grateful? Is it when you are adopted, or is it when, do you feel that the message of being just grateful happens also in the foster care system when you're in a foster home, even if it's a challenging foster home for you?
Let me think about that one. I think the grateful comes more from the adoption, and the foster care experience is more about fear and survival.
Okay.
In the foster home, I slept underneath my sibling's bed and in his closet because I never felt safe. So in that scenario, that was just me. I would just needed to be safe. I didn't know what I needed. I just needed to be safe. So once you're adopted, you're like, oh, good. I think I'm safe. Oh, look, I have food. This is great. And, my adoptive parents had their dysfunctions. So that was like a double whammy, as I call it. There was a lot of dysfunctional things that were said and done. So,
Well, and I think it goes back to your adoptive mother who, as the foster parent, was fearful for her own loss of you and transferring that fear onto you so that you could share it or carry it for her? I think so often as adults, we don't realize the impact we have on the young people in our lives.
Yeah, and she had her own trauma, and so did my father. He had his own trauma, and those carried through.
Yeah. So you grew up, you tried some things to see if they worked. Where did you find your footing? Like, where and when did your footing sort of start to feel more stable, and how did that happen?
Ooh, it's a good one. Stable might be a strong word, but
I think so. Yeah.
I have to say, I have a couple of teacher experiences that I feel like they're important to share. And one was when I was in junior high school or middle school as they call it now. And I had to write an essay in English and I wrote it about my adoption. And the reaction from the teacher was, we have to bring her parents in. And it was almost like a secret document for me. Like I didn't know it was a secret, but it was just a way for me to get out. And then it was taken as, oh, why are you writing about this? So it became this next layer of keep it down, don't say anything. So that was that. And then the next experience I had some good experiences in there too, but the next experience I had was with a guidance counselor. And this, I would say, was the turning point in my life because I knew at 12 years old that I wanted to be a hairdresser. How? I don't know why, but I knew I wanted to be a hairdresser. And I was trapped in this high school. We moved from the inner city projects to a very affluent town because we had an aunt that had an apartment and wanted us to get out of the projects. It was getting dangerous. So we moved to this affluent town, still the same family that lived in the projects with no money, no anything. But this school, I just didn't fit in there. But I couldn't go to the vocational school until I was in the 10th grade. And I couldn't take hairdressing until I was in the 11th grade. That's how it worked then. And my guidance counselor brought me in the 9th grade and he said, what are you going to do next year? And I said, oh, I'm going to go to the vocational school. I'm going to be a hairdresser. And he said, no, you're not. You're going to stay right here and you're going to take secretarial and accounting courses. And I remember sitting across from him thinking, no, I don't want to do that. And I said that. I said, no, I'm going to be a hairdresser. And I was really excited. And he said, oh, no, I'm going to bring your parents in. So again, it was another scenario that was questioning me. And now they were bringing my parents in. And thankfully, my parents were very blue collar. And their mindset was, if she has a trade, then we don't have to worry about her. And they actually said that out loud. So thankfully, they supported me going. And when I went to the vocational school, at the time when I went, it was the misfit school. It was one step before jail. That's how it was looked at. Everybody there was drug addicts. Everybody there was troublemakers, all of it. And it was like the school of misfits, I called it. But yet, what a welcoming, open community and we all had an understanding of each other. And to this day, if you talk to any of us that are Vokies, we have this special bond. That was the turning point. Going to that school, the teachers I had in that school who let me be me for the first time, I was high energy and I roamed around the classroom. And I had a teacher that said, you know what? If you're learning, roam around, sit on the heater if you want to. Whatever you want to do. And it was life altering. And I was lucky enough to be alumni of the year. I think it was 2008. And most of my teachers were still there. And I was able to get up and all my speech was about thanking them for allowing me to be me and helping guide me to be the success that I was at that time. It was such an honor to be able to do that. So that school was life altering and those teachers were life altering.
Yeah. I'm like reflecting on the impact of telling your story and then feeling like it was not supposed to be a story that you could tell. Mm-hmm. And what that message must have felt like to anybody, but then to somebody who already had this unsettled feeling in life, to share your story and sort of be told that that's not a story to tell, not mm-hmm. Keep your story to yourself. And, and I think in protection mode for your parents, in protection mode for you, was the message that they thought they were sending, but in reality, the message was your story is not something that anybody else can hear, and how long you must have kept that.
Yes, and there was a lot of shame when I was adopted. The shame around you didn't tell people you were adopted. You kept it a secret. I remember being with my mother and this woman in the grocery store. I was 20, and she said, "Oh, this is your daughter?" And my mother beamed, "Yes." And she said, "Oh, she looks like you." Let me tell you, I did not look like anybody in my family. Everybody in my family looked exactly alike. I was like the big green thumb that stuck out. And we looked at each other, and we wanted to say, "No, we don't. I was adopted." But when you say that, then you see the look on other people's face. I go, let's not talk about it. you know, Very weird. So there's a lot of shame around it. There's a lot of mystery around it. There's a lot of, when you don't know your story, there's holes in your story as a child. You have to fill in those holes because you can't have a story that doesn't flow. You can't have missing pieces. So as a child, you fill in these blanks. So nothing really feels real. So, it's somebody telling you that you're writing this story that you feel is real on a piece of paper, and now they're reinforcing that is not real, and you should not talk about it because it is shameful.
Yeah. And it almost goes back to the comment of misfits, right? You don't see someone that looks like you in your community. You don't have somebody who can have a shared experience with you in your community. And then you find a community of people who are similar in the fact that they don't have somebody like them. And now all of a sudden, this band of misfits is a community of togetherness and community. I think of the ability to find a space where you can belong for the first time, right? So you're 17-ish at this point, and you're finally finding a place where you feel seen, heard, and accepted.
Yeah, and as hard as it is being a teenager anyways, because you don't know who you are or what you're all about, and you're trying to find your way. But it was a different level there for all of us, which was great. And I was younger when I went into high school because my birthday was in September. So I was 17 when I graduated.
Oh my gosh.
I turned 18
So young.
shortly after I graduated. Yeah, I was very young.
Oh my goodness.
They wouldn't let that happen today, but back then I was a baby.
So you went through this experience, you had all of these challenges. Now you're out here helping others. When did that sort of come together for you to help others?
It has been in my blood forever. As a small child, I would say 8 or 9 years old, one of the things that the social workers told my parents was they had to do something family orientated with us. So we went camping, which was very inexpensive. And throughout my whole entire life, we went camping for the summer. So I was about 8 or 9 years old, and my friend's mother would take in foster care children. And I got up early every day, and I went to her campsite, and I got the 2 little girls, and I would walk them in their carriages. It is very early on, and that was my life. It still is. And I think I had that understanding what they were going through without having to say any words. And I think that's, I would say, one of my strong points. Like, you don't have to say a lot to me to understand how you feel.
Yeah. Say more about that, because when you described your youth and how it's shaped who you are today, you also mentioned that you don't have to say a lot for me to understand your story or for me to connect with you. So say a little bit more about how that experience works for you.
People call it empathy, but I think it's more than that. And I'm writing it in my book. I talk about it being magic. Like, I felt like I had magic in me, like a sixth sense. And it goes along with that I guess they call it hyper arousal, when you're constantly scanning a room. And that's what I was doing all the time. And I still can read body language, eye contact. I can tell, I can hug somebody and I can tell how thick their wall is, just by hugging. So I call it magic. Now I call it magic, that I can tell how people distance themselves from me, how they're feeling, if they're feeling safe around me, they're not feeling safe around me. And then I can adjust, what I need to do, because they're not aware of what they're doing.
Yeah, and you are because of almost that need to be in survival all the time. You're picking up all sorts of clues in order to stay safe, in order to feel safe. And all of that input has created the person that you are today. So fascinating. I think it is magic, but I also can literally feel it in a room. When you walk in, I can see the magic from you, right? I can visualize it because I can understand your perception is so in tune to others in order to, as little Kim, stay safe, but as adult Kim is to support and help others. And that's really interesting.
It's always been my number one agenda to make people feel safe with me or anything that I was doing. And even when I created the salon, it had to be a safe space for everybody to feel like they could come in and just, feel like home. And that is one of the biggest compliments I've ever got about my salon is that it just felt like coming home.
So, from my experience of knowing salon workers, right? So, you start as owning a booth and then you progress. So, how far have you gone in your journey as a salon owner? Like, what does it look like to come into a salon with Kim?
I'll start at the beginning and I'll try to make it
Or
fast. I started working in a salon when I was 16 and I made $1.75 an hour because I got tips. So they didn't feel like they had to give me minimum wage. And another thing I talk about a lot is about the people who come into your life, the mentors and the people who change the direction of your life without even knowing it. And that first job I had was priceless in my education as far as me being a salon owner. She taught me the importance of giving back, the importance of educating and training future professionals, the importance of giving your time to these future professionals. I didn't know it at the time. I was 16, but she shaped me as a salon owner.
you were cutting hair at 16?
Yes, I was. And you can talk to my many friends, and they had some interesting hairdos, I guess, hair experiences, whatever you want to talk about. But yeah, whatever you want to call it. I've been doing it for 40 years.
So you're still cutting hair, you own a salon, so you're supporting others in your salon.
Not the salon anymore. So I closed the salon in 2021. So it was 30 years. But 30 years, and my only goal in that salon was to hire from vocational schools. So I only hired from the vocational schools from day one, which nobody did back then because nobody wanted to pay them. And, I was 25 when I opened my salon. So I was a baby. I had no idea what I was doing. I still had all of my trauma on my sleeve, and that kind of ran the show in my business for a long time. But I had that, I would say everybody who worked for me was a little bit of a broken bird, and when they came to me, they were still in high school. And my goal was to teach them how to budget, to show them that they could buy their first car or whatever, go on their first vacation, and I watched them buy their first homes. And, that's what it was for me. Watching them become successful and show the world that you weren't just a hairdresser and that it wasn't something that you did because you couldn't be anything else. You weren't smart enough to be anything else. I was told I wasn't smart enough to go to college. I was told all of those things.
Yeah.
And so my mission was to just prove to the world that you can be very successful. And I ran my business very different from any other salon. My employees had matched retirement, paid vacations, 100% of their education was paid for. They went to huge hair shows every year. I could have kept that as a profit. That wasn't my goal. My goal was to watch them become successful. I hated when they flew the nest because that made me feel abandoned. That was a huge piece of my trauma, was that it was very hard for me, very hard. And I did not handle it well 99% of the time.
You've mended, you've supported, you've fostered, you've
Parented.
awesome. And then you felt abandoned. Oh, God.
Yeah,
My
I
God.
did.
Yeah.
Yeah, I did.
And so now, do you feel like you've worked through that aspect of abandonment?
I mean, yes, for the most part. But what I believe about trauma, it doesn't disappear. That's what I talk about, those trauma chips in your body. You have to learn and understand your body and listen to your body and get to the emotions behind the feelings. A lot of times we have a stomach ache or we have this or we have that. That's just our body telling us that, probably a lot of people can relate to if you don't want to cry and you get that lump in your throat, that is your body just holding that back. So when you can get into your body and just relax and do different techniques to loosen your body, and then usually the tears follow. But that's just one example of the body responding to that suppressed stuff.
Wow. And so now you're hosting a podcast, you're writing a book. What are we hearing from Kim in the wonderful world of your brain? Share a little bit behind what we're learning from you.
Well, I think one of my goals now is to help people understand, children especially, who have gone through traumatic experiences a little bit better. And I'm hoping my book is going to help those adult children, because children who have traumatic experiences that don't heal are just adult with children's traumatic experiences. It didn't go away. It doesn't go anywhere. The behaviors are still there. Everything's still there. So I'm hoping my book helps people understand that they're not alone and that there's a way out. We don't have to be stuck. So I think the podcast, the book, restarting to mentor foster youth, which, I was doing before my breast cancer diagnosis, helping on panels and helping them through programs where they teach them how to go out in the world. These are young people who are getting ready to age out of the foster care system, which is another big issue, no support, and you're supposed to get a full-time job and have an apartment and buy groceries and figure it all out.
It's an age, right? Like, so we define your journey as a foster person by 18, right? Like, it's just an age. It doesn't matter your mental status. It doesn't matter your education status. It's just an age. It's so interesting for me to think about the systems that we have in place. The intent behind is always with greater good and positive intent, but it doesn't work for everything and every person. So it's interesting that you bring that up, the aging out.
If I had to go on my own at 18 and figure it out, no way. I would have been on the streets. And that's why a lot of homeless youth come from the foster care system.
Yeah, because you don't have anything when you leave the system, right?
Nope. And Massachusetts, I think it's 22.
Okay.
You can stay in programs until you're 22. But, Massachusetts is so amazing when it comes to stuff like that. But not every state is like that.
No. This has been so awesome, and I don't want to end it now. Maybe I'll have you come back and share a little bit more, but I really love ending my conversations with advice, and I'm going to ask you, Kim, to share some advice with teens today who maybe identify with your story.
I would say share your story if you can with somebody who's safe. Finding that safe person is really hard when you're that age and you're stuck in survival. And my advice would be, I don't know, just know that it is going to get better. It can get better. It might not seem it in the moment. And there could be somebody listening to me saying, oh yeah, well, she had this or she had that and she did this and she did that. And I'm not a unicorn by any means. And I think that's it, that you can get out. Life does get better. I wouldn't have believed that when I was in the thick of it.
Well, and I think it harkens back to, you alluded to, she had this, she had that. That's right. There's that comparison again, right? Your story doesn't connect to me because of all of these things. But I think the piece that I have taken away is that we all have things, and there is all struggle for all of us. Some is harder than other, but we are resilient. You show us the resilience that can happen regardless of the story. And if there are people who resonate with your story, how can they find you? How can they connect with you?
Social media, anywhere. I'm on everywhere. Instagram, I'm on TikTok, I'm on Facebook, my website, which is kimrussellpro.com. DM me anytime. Email me. I will answer. And I always say, if I don't have the answer, I can find somebody who does have the answer. If I can't help you with what you need, somebody out there can.
Thank you so much. I will put your information in our show notes, and this has been a very big treat for me. So thank you so much for coming and sharing your story. Thank you for being resilient. Thank you for persevering, and especially thank you for helping all the people that you help out there.
Thank you.
Are you ready to help the young people in your life unlock their inner strength and step confidently into leadership? The new workbook from Peers Not Fears, Your Voice Matters, Uncovering Your Unique Leadership. It's designed to help teens see the leader in themselves, step by step. It's not just a workbook. It's the first step towards a ripple effect that could change lives. Let's turn today's teens into tomorrow's titans. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Leaders of Today, Teens to Titans. If you found this episode helpful, please subscribe, leave a review, and share it with other parents who might benefit from this conversation. Together, we can support our teens in building healthy, positive relationships and become leaders of tomorrow. Until next time, I'm Lorraine Connell, and this is Leaders of Today, Teens to Titans.